Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to be a continuation of a previous lesson from the second chapter in Peter's second epistle. Made it all the way up to the 11th verse, which forms the first half, and now we're going to take it from 11 to verse 22. We want to briefly review what comes before it. So the topic is addressed in the opening verse: false prophets, false teachers. They're nothing new to Christianity. They were with the Jews, and they've been with us ever since. But what's particularly disconcerting is they have destructive heresies, and they bring destruction on themselves, and they exert a destructive influence under those who take them seriously. And so we are to avoid them like the plague. But unfortunately, many shall follow their destructive ways, we read in the second verse. So, worldly people are attracted to their own, and they offer a message of the world and wealth of the world, and it said they're motivated by greed. They're willing to lie and use you for gain, so they do not have the mentality of the shepherd. Their judgment is certain and inescapable. And then I just want to read verses 4 through 11. They form a single sentence, and rather than break it down verse by verse, I just want to summarize it in its plenary whole before I launch into the actual lesson itself. Verse 4, "For if Yahweh did not spare the angels who sinned, but sent them to Gehenna, and delivered them into chains of darkness, to be kept for judgment, and did not spare the world of old, but preserved Noah, a preacher of righteousness, and 7 others, bringing in the flood on the world of the wicked, and having reduced to ashes the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, condemned them to destruction, having made them an example to those who afterward would live wickedly, and rescued righteous Lot, who was oppressed with the indecent behaviors of the lawless. For day after day that righteous man dwelling among them tortured his righteous soul by seeing and hearing their lawless works. Yahweh knows how to rescue the reverent ones from trial, and to keep the unrighteous unto the day of judgment." It's actually 2 sentences, so we just want to establish he uses 3 examples from the Old Testament: the fall of Lucifer and its accompanying consequences. We can read of this in chapters such as Isaiah 14 and Ezekiel 28. Then Noah, which we can read of in Genesis 6 through 10, how he was a single being selected to replenish and repopulate the earth and continue what had began with Adam, but was deemed irredeemably. So the earth underwent a baptism of sorts. That's what Peter compares it to in his first epistle. And he describes Noah as a preacher of righteousness. So we can imagine him standing on the ark telling people, get in, this is going to come. Then he moves to the example of Lot, who was Abraham's, as he came to be later known, nephew, in Sodom and Gomorrah, an ancient epicenter of iniquity. And there we don't tend to think of him as righteously as the Jews do. He was exalted and praised in one of the Deuterocanonicals, but we tend to think of his descendants. The Moabites were more or less perpetually wicked evil, but Lot was, clearly more righteous than the most righteous denizen of Sodom and Gomorrah. These cities were wholly given to iniquity, and they're the classic case of Old Testament fire and brimstone. So if the angels are inescapable, and if Yahweh is able to rescue you as he did Lot, actually that's getting a little far ahead of ourselves. Yahweh knows how to rescue the reverent ones from trial, and to keep the unrighteous unto the day of judgment, to be punished. And most of all, those walking after the flesh, in filthy lust, and despising authority, bold, headstrong, speaking evil of esteemed ones. Whereas angels who are greater in strength and power do not bring a slanderous accusation against them before the master. So if angels who are spiritually superior and stronger to us met their judgment, we too, they are creatures of agency. They have the gift of moral choice, as do we. So how we use that moral choice can qualify us for heaven or send us to hell. And if it's the same for them, and he's able to rescue Lot, who's surrounded by wickedness, from the destruction through the angels who were sent to lead him away. Now the 12th and first verse we're actually going to be covering. But these, like natural unreasoning beasts, having been born to be caught and destroyed, blaspheme that which they do not know, shall be destroyed in their destruction. So these false teachers were not pillars or purveyors of wisdom. They were compared and debased to unreasoning beasts. They were carnal creatures, wholly instinct-driven and just motivated by fleshly desires. And their destiny is to be destroyed. They're going to be killed one day permanently for the way that they live, which is a blasphemy in itself. They speak irreverently of that which demands to be spoken of reverently and with respect. And so they merit their swift and total destruction, and it's all but certain, and it's the just consequence for following your animalistic instincts as a substitute for the higher, the intellectual and spiritual capacities which our Creator has endowed us with. He wants us to use those and not follow those who speak and act and teach you to become like unreasoning beast. Being about to receive the wages of unrighteousness, deeming indulgence in the day of pleasure, spots and blemishes, reveling in their own deceptions, while they feast with you. So the wages of unrighteousness, we can imagine, are the same as the wages of sin. That brings us to Romans 6:23, which by connection is death. So the consequences and the just retribution of a sinful life, and one that is unrepented of especially, is death, spiritual death, the second death, eternal death. So, we have all around us the temptation to indulge in pleasures, but we have to identify with discernment these spots and the blemishes and the marks, and these very people are basking in the delight of their dishonesty while they feast with you. They break bread for you like a friend, but there's something hidden and subterranean that Peter is trying to warn them about that may not be immediately detectable to the eyes of the body, eyes of sight. Speaking of eyes, having eyes filled with an adulteress, and unable to cease from sin, enticing unstable beings, having a heart trained in greed, children of a curse. So talk about being an unreasoning beast. These people are looking at every female who comes across them as a potential sexual partner. They have their eyes, they are filled with adultery, so they very much have the eyes of lust, of which John speaks of in the first epistle, 2nd chapter, 16 verses. So that just shows they're unable to cease from sin. They're stuck in it. They're loving it. They're lost. They're loving it, but they're ignorant. So where ignorance is bliss, till 'tis folly to be wise, is the motto and mantra and maxim of fools. But if he's trying to tell them that they should know better, and they had their heart trained in greed, so they were all motivated by money, and they were children of a curse. They may be blessed financially in this life, but they're going to inherit a curse, the curse of hell, the last place any of us want to be. Having left the right way, they went astray, having followed the way of Balaam, the son of Beor, who loved the wages of unrighteousness. So this indicates that some of these false teachers had a knowledge of the truth, and they deliberately chose to go astray. And their example is before them in the Old Testament's Mesopotamian soothsayer, Balaam, son of Beor, of whom we read of in Numbers 22 through 26. And he loved the wages of unrighteousness. He was a prophet for profit, a hireling herder, who the king of the Midianites had hired to issue a curse against the Israelites who were passing through his land. He was threatened by their presence, which shook the earth. And unbeknownst to Balaam, he actually has a direct encounter with divinity, something none of his practices, his soothsaying practices, were competent to elicit, and the message of Yahweh is irresistible, so he speaks it as he is told it, but he loved the wages of unrighteousness. What did he do not long after that? He enticed Israel to sleep with either the Moabites or the Midianites, and that from that adultery came idolatry. So they were worshiping on their hands and knees to these foreign pagan deities in no time flat. But he was rebuked for his transgression. A dumb donkey speaking with the voice of a man restrained the madness of the prophet. So the message he delivered should not, if we take that at face value, we tend to lose sight of what motivated him to be there. And the dumb donkey speaking the voice of a man, this was the voice of an angel or voice of divinity, was the donkey which interrupted his path spoke through him, saying, leading him to the eventual authentic revelation, of which is recorded throughout Numbers 22 through 24. We can read his message therein. These are fountains without water, clouds driven by a storm, to whom the blackest darkness is kept forever. So, in addition to describing them unflatteringly in comparison to animals, Peter adds the element of the elements of nature. They are unable to bring life. They are unable to replenish. They are without water. They are spreading darkness, not light. They are clouds and chaos, and the blackest darkness is reserved specifically for people like them. These are we who teach bear a greater responsibility in gravity of dimension of judgment than those who are not similarly elevated and entrusted. We have a responsibility to not lead our students astray in error, and the potential is always there. So if you are here, I'm assuming you're not a superficial sap. You're kind of motivated by the spiritual sustenance. That's what I'm all about, and I'm going to share some of you for the remainder of this lesson at least. Verse 18. For speaking arrogant nonsense, they entice, through the lust of the flesh, through indecencies, the ones who have indeed escaped from those living in delusion. So their top targets, their prized possession, their number one skulls they love to parade in their circles is the skull of the born-again believer. They had what they had, and they want to bring those who lost what they had down with them, because as the old adage goes, misery enjoys company. So having escaped from the lies and the lust of the world, and the arrogance, the pride that's the way of the world, and it's ultimately nonsense, the world offers the inhabitant very little spiritual sustenance. But having escaped from that delusion, there is no reason or right to return to that life, yet the potentiality always remains and always must be taken seriously and with gravity, because the consequences for succumbing, as we eventually read, we're going to be better off if we never came to a knowledge of the truth to begin with. Promising them freedom, though themselves being slaves of corruption, for one is a slave to whatever overcomes him. So these men were carnal creatures, remember, and they preached antinomianism, which is the term attached to Anne Hutchinson, but it actually has roots in libertine philosophies. So a lot of the libertine philosophies formed the nature of a lot of the early first century heresies. They taught that liberty from all rules, from all authorities. They spoke evil against authorities. They taught every man to be their own master. Don't follow any rules. You can make up the rules as you go along. But they were subtly enslaving, and obviously enslaved themselves to sin and corruption, because one is a slave to whatever overcomes him. So far better to be a slave of the Messiah and a servant, because he is a liberating master. His yoke is light and his burden is not heavy, and he promises rest to all those who come, where sin gives us none of the rest. It instills in us a restlessness, an appetite to gain more, whereas we are more or less permanently satisfied with the inner quietness and contentedness and the peace of heart that comes from being a Christian. For if after they have escaped the defilements of the world, through the knowledge of the Master and Savior Yahshua Messiah, they are again entangled in them, and overcomes the latter end is worse for them than the first. So he's saying they're better off if they never believed in the first place, because with knowledge comes responsibility. With greater reception of revelation, so too is one's consequences and accountability magnified and enhanced. So the potentiality to abandon, to not, all we have to do is get in the habit of not reading the scriptures every day, and then we'll slowly retreat without even knowing it. So this potentiality is very much alive and well. I'm personally of the school of thought that one can lose their salvation. There is a certain school of thought that argues that these people were never really saved to begin with, so I don't want to waste time getting into that debate. For now, it suffices to say that everyone who says they're saved is not really saved. A lot of saved people use that excuse for libertine behavior, of which we are warned of earlier. They can lie, they can steal, and say, I'm saved, I'm forgiven, it's all at the cross, I just came once as I was, and the arrangement is more or less permanent, but that's not the way it works. So there is a difference between saying you're saved and being saved. We're here to learn and differentiate the difference, because not all who believe as they claim as they believe, or claim as they believe as they claim, and rather. For it would have been better for them not to have known the way of righteousness, than having known it, to turn from the sacred commands delivered unto them. So they were repenting, but in the wrong direction. They were retreating, and they were repenting. They were doing a 180 from having come from the escapements and the allures of the lust and the pleasures, the various delights of the world. They were entangled in it, and so they had one knee, they were knee deep in it. There was no extrication because they were entangled by it, and they're worse off than they had been if they had not known the word. And to retreat to the word after knowing the world, after knowing the word, is, we read in James 4:4 that friendship with the world is enmity with Elohim. So the world is not our friend, nor should we should be friendly to the world, but not its friend, because many people in the world and its entire system is against us, and they are one of our three main spiritual enemies, the other being Satan and the flesh. And the flesh certainly creeps up here. These false teachers were carnal creatures motivated by the fleshly appetites and desires and lust and all that. For them the proverb has proved true, a dog returns to his own vomit, and a washed sow to her rolling in the mud. So the first of these two proverbs can be identified in the Old Testament, the first of which belongs to Solomon, writing in Proverbs 26:11. Now the Jewish people, they did not regard dogs as cute, cuddly animals the way we do. They were a filthy animal, and they were a term of derision, which they applied, for instance, on Gentiles. They referred to them collectively as dogs, many of them. So a dog returning to its own vomit means that these teachers, these saved claimants, are not really saved, because there's no newness of nature. The dog returns to his own vomit because he doesn't know any better, and that's what he is designed to do. But we who have been transformed will not return to our own vomit, the muck and the mud and the clutter and the filth of the moral pollution of the earth. We will not go back to it, having been redeemed, if we are serious and diligent and honest in work out our path with integrity. For them the proverb has proved a wash sow to her rolling in the mud. Now this proverb dates to some intertestamental writing, or actually, it's a non-canonical Jewish book whose name I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce, which can be dated to the year 500 AD. So Proverbs were not limited to the book of Proverbs alone. These Proverbs are distinct from every other in that they are inspired Proverbs. But once this non-inspired proverb is amalgamated within the sacred writ, it becomes inspired by its very inclusion. So Peter sanctified a non-canonical proverb by applying it to this is a general epistle written to no one in particular. His message is for everyone. And the warning and the danger and the proximity of the threat of false teachings creeping in. Now, they invite nothing but trouble, as we have read, deduced, and extracted from our summary, and there are formulas, and we read more of the specific nature of their heresy in the chapter which comes after this. We're going to save that for a different lesson. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. I'm so glad you're here. See you next time. See you soon. Bye-bye.